Next slide, please. So we'll move on to talk about the proposed emergency regulations. Next slide, please. As Susan mentioned, a petition to prohibit this gear was referred to the department in 2019, and our initial strategy was going to be to address the concerns as part of a regular rulemaking. But with the serious increase in participation in 2020, we then came to believe that an emergency exists and that an emergency regulation was needed to protect clam stocks over the spring and summer of 2021, when clamming is popular and participation is likely to be high due to the ongoing COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So we are proposing amendments to two sections. The first is 2920, which has to do with the general harvest of clams. What we are proposing is to specify the tools allowed to take clams. And these include every tool that's been used historically to harvest these species, including the suction devices, the clam guns, slurp guns I mentioned before, and which we received public comments about. We're also specifically defining hydraulic pumps in the regulations and specifically prohibiting their use to take clams, as well as prohibiting their possession on clam beds or concurrently with any clam, except in one's permanent residence. Additionally, to address law enforcement concerns about the enforceability of bag limits, we're proposing an amendment which would require each person harvesting clams to maintain their own container and prohibit them from commingling their limits of clams with others. Next section, please. The second section was identified during commission and department staff during the development of this proposal. It pertains to the harvest of sand crabs and shrimp, because sand crabs and shrimp and clams often co-occupy the same habitat and are harvested by similar means. There's a concern that an individual that may be cited for using hydraulic pumps to harvest clams could claim that they were using them to harvest sand crabs or shrimp. Consistent with the proposed changes to 2920, we're specifying the tools allowed to take sand crabs and shrimp, and that again includes slurp guns. Further, we're not aware of anyone using these hydraulic pumps to take sand crabs or shrimp at this time, and we're specifically prohibiting the use of hydraulic pumps. Next slide, please. So we as a department plan to continue outreach efforts in concert with the Marine Protected Area Program. If this emergency amendment is adopted, we plan to reach out to tackle shops, local and social media, to alert participants that this gear type is no longer allowed. If the COVID conditions allow us, we are planning to conduct creel surveys this spring and summer on the clam fishery. And we're going to continue to evaluate stocks and the sustainability of the fishery, consider a need for regular rulemaking and readoption of this emergency regulation if needed. And I just want to underline that we see this emergency regulation as a stopgap measure to really protect these species this spring, when we expect there to be high participation and the otherwise unregulated use of this very efficient gear type. Next slide, please. So thank you for your attention. Thanks again for making time for us on short notice. And thanks to all the department and commission staff, which put together this proposal very quickly. My contact information is on the bottom here, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Any questions from the commissioners at this point? No. Okay, I don't see any questions from the commissioners. Can we go to public comment then? I see we have a few people lined up.
Santino Bernazzani.
Thank you. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, commissioners and department staff. Thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to speak today about the emergency regulations on human-powered dredging devices, aka hydraulic pump gear used while recreational clamming. My name is Santino Bernazzani, and I'm a recreational fisherman representing 4 generations of my family here today. My family has been digging for a variety of clam species within Tomales Bay since the 1970s, and we're some of the first locals to utilize a clam gun or slurp gun, as it's been described before, to do so. A clam gun is essentially a hand-operated piston that sucks mud and water up the tube and requires the substrate to be manually expelled by the operator. These clam guns are categorically different than the hydraulic dredging devices we're discussing today. And I wanted to speak about these differences so the commission can distinguish between those tools when considering these emergency regulations changes to the clamming fishery. I'm in favor for not allowing these hand dredging devices, but I'm adamant that clam guns, as I described, should be removed from such regulation changes, as they are not the problem that need to be addressed. Clam guns have sustainably been used to harvest soft-shell clams within Tomales Bay for the better part of 5 decades and have never been attributed to declining fishery. I appreciate your time today and hope the commission will specifically distinguish between these types of tools used to harvest soft-shell clams and leave out clam guns my family has used sustainably for several generations. Thank you.
Ashley Eagle Gibbs.
Hi, yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, my name is Ashley Eagle Gibbs, and I'm the Conservation Director with the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin. Our mission is to protect and sustain the unique lands, waters, and biodiversity of West Marin. And we also manage Marin MPA Watch Program in partnership with Point Reyes National Seashore and the California Academy of Sciences. First, I want to congratulate President Silva and Vice President Murray, and I want to thank staff and the commissioners for their continued service and dedication to our environment. We support the emergency regulations to prohibit the use of hydraulic pump gear for the recreational take of clams, including clarifying amendments to apply the same gear restriction for sand crab and shrimp. We also support the requirement to use a separate container for clam collection to ease enforcement efforts. In particular, we support the ban to avoid unnecessary impacts to sensitive eelgrass and intertidal habitat, as well as unsustainable fishing. Both Tomales Bay, a Ramsar site, and Drake's Estero, the only West Coast marine wilderness south of Alaska, are very sensitive estuarine habitats that should be afforded the highest protection. Eelgrass is a critical foundation species designated as an essential fish habitat and relied on by many bird species, many of which are in decline. We thank the department for their fast action and recent enforcement actions in Tomales Bay to address some over limit take. We know that enforcement resources are very limited, and we very much appreciate your prompt attention to these issues. On a related note, we do want to raise a few issues of concern related to unlawful take in the Drake's Estero area of clams. The September 2020 MPA Community Compliance Forum report documented unlawful clamming in Estero de Limantor State Marine Reserve, that's the mouth of the Estero, and Drake's Estero State Marine Conservation Area as a top concern, including some people have found hidden clam gear in that area. Also of concern, we've received reports of incidents of fishing and motorized kayak use, which is prohibited in that area. Lastly, we want to thank Mr. Vogler for his submission of this petition, and we look forward to the next steps in the regulatory process. Thank you.
Wayne Locke.
Hi, my name is Wayne Locke. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, I have a bachelor's and master's degrees in biomedical electrical engineering and more than 30 years experience in these fields. Between that and having married into a family full of lawyers, I'm very adept at reading and interpreting legal language that includes technical distinctions, and that is what is worrying me here. I'm a longtime member of online fishing clubs, including Coastside Fishing Club and Full Speed Fishing Club. In a normal year, my friends and I will go clamming on 6 to 10 days, coinciding with significantly low tides, mostly often out of Lawson's Landing. We always follow the regulations and have been checked by game wardens many times without incident. We do see many people offending and getting caught doing so while we're there. We run into a surprising amount of people who do not know the regulations when we were out on the bay, and do our best to explain the rules to them when necessary. We've been using clam guns and pumps based on a tennis ball piston for decades without any detrimental effect on the environment or the clam population. We are fearful that the new regulations, depending on interpretation by a given game warden, may result in us being found in violation if we continue to use the gear we have always used, as in some ways you could call it a hydraulic pump. The current proposed regulation is somewhat vague in definition of the allowed clam guns. This is impactful because of the change in wording to blanketly prohibit gear not specifically described in the regulation. This is similar to the issue with gooseneck barnacles in agenda item 21A3. Gooseneck barnacles are only illegal because the language for invertebrates outlaws everything not specifically listed, and gooseneck barnacles are not on the list, probably because the people writing the regulations never thought anyone would want to eat them. I want to request that the regulations are made very specific to outlaw the two-man systems that have been identified as problematic without outlawing pump gear we've used for decades with no detrimental effects because of this style of writing the regulations. One possible way to do this would be to define the allowed clam guns as being any device that is constructed with only one piece of tubing with a fixed diameter that can contain sand and water. The current wording related to suction only does not really apply to the guns we use because they do suck water and then push it back out. Suction only guns really are only used for like razor clamming in very loose sand on the beach. Thank you.
Bill Varney.